Hi everybody, I'm Rick Beato. On today's Everything Music, we're going to talk about how to use modulations in your compositions. Now, off the top of my head, I thought of 11 different modulation possibilities. There may be more, but this is all I could think of just as I was writing them down. Number 1, the diatonic common chord. Number 2, the chromatic pivot chord. Number 3, enharmonic dominant modulation. Number 4 is the deceptive cadence. Number 5 is the enharmonic diminished seventh. Number 6 is the diminished seventh to dominant seventh. Number 7 is the chromatic mediant, which we've actually talked about. Number 8 is the common tone or pivot note. Number 9, direct or linear modulation. Number 10 is the chain modulation. We've talked a little bit about that. Number 11 is the parallel modulation, which we talked about in the last episode. A lot of different things here. I'm going to talk about what each one of them are and give you demonstrations of them, because that's obviously the best way is to actually hear what they are. You'll recognize them. You'll say, oh, I know that one. But it's actually good to start here and see what your possibilities are, because anytime you're searching on where to go, either linearly, horizontally, as in line writing, or in your vertical, or when you put the linear and vertical together, the counterpoint that stack up and create chord progressions. This should give you a lot of possibilities on where to go in your compositions. Okay, number 1, the diatonic common chord modulation. If we take two keys that are closely related, and when I say closely related, I have the keys of G and D major here. And they're closely related because on the circle of fifths they're right next to each other. Any keys that are next to each other are closely related. They can be related, G and D are related, G and C are related very closely, both of them, and you'll see how. I'll show you. One of the things is they are the keys that share the most common chords. Okay, now I wrote out all the chords in G major here. And then I wrote all the chords in D major, but I started it on G, just so you can visually see how they line up. I thought it'd be easier this way. Let's look at the chords that are common between the two keys, okay? The G major is common between the two keys. B minor is common between two keys. E minor and D major are both common between the two keys. So we have 4 chords in here that are common between the two keys. This is actually the case for any chords that are on either side and going in a sharp direction or a flat direction. So C major will also share 4 chords with G major, as I will show you. As you get further away, A major shares fewer chords, and I'll show you about that right now. The way this is usually used is by substituting a predominant chord in the new key. Predominant chords are, let's say this here, predominant, meaning they come before the dominant. We've talked about this before. The 4 chord is a predominant, and the 2 minor chord are predominants. Okay. I've written out G and A major together and G and E major together. So I'm going further around the circle of fifths here to see how many common chords we have. If you look at the key of G and A major, there's really only this. B minor is common between the chords, and D major is common between the two keys. Okay. If you look at the key of E major, there are no common chords between the two keys. So this is not a candidate for common chord modulation, for diatonic common chord modulation. Okay, I'll give you another example going in a flat direction, just so you can see the comparison between G major and C major. Same thing. Anytime that you're on either side of the particular target key here, if you're on the flat side, you have 4 chords in common, and if you're on the sharp side, you have 4 chords in common. So I'll show you. G major to C major has G major in common, it has A minor in common, it has C major in common, and it has E minor in common. So that is 4. Okay, so it's the same. Now, if I go back here to F major, it's the same as D major. It has 2 chords in common, and by the time you get to B flat major, there are no chords in common between G and B flat major. No diatonic chords. That's what we're talking about here. So let's talk about how to use this. Okay, so let's hear what the diatonic common chord modulation sounds like. We'll be in the key of G, just like we were. I'm going to start on G major here, so it's going to go G major, C major, 5, then I go 3, B minor, E minor, here's your modulation, A major to D major. Play it again. So I begin in G major with a 1, 4, 5, and then the transition starts happening on the 2 chord, okay, on the B minor chord, because the 2 chord then becomes the relative minor in the new key because we're modulating to D major, okay? And we have 2 transition chords that are 2 common chords between the 2 keys, which are B minor and E minor. E minor being the 2 chord, which is the predominant. I talked about that. Predominant chords are typically your common chord modulation. Listen to it again. 1, 4, 5, 3. That's the beginning of the modulation. Then E minor, and then A major. Then we're more obviously in D major there. Once you've had those 2 chords, it usually takes those 2 chords, B minor, E minor, A7 to D major, that you'll hear the modulation. Now you can also do things where you'll play, you can have, or you can be in G major. You can obviously do things where you're you can obviously use suspensions and things like that. We can go. Some different suspensions. You can use suspension on the G, C, Mediant, sus4 with a 3rd, and then to color it a little bit, you can. It still achieves the same function. You're doing that common chord. You have those 2 common chords in the middle of the progression. Once you hit the first common chord, the B minor in the key of G, which is the 3 chord, you have a dual purpose there. You have a 3 chord in G major, and you have the 6 chord in D major. When you hit the second chord, the E minor, then you have the 2 chord in D major. And once I play the A major, we know the A major is not part of G major. It's really the 5 of 5, but it's an obvious 5. It's an obvious 5-1 cadence to go from A major to D major. So there's no question we've established a new key of D major using our diatonic common chord modulation. You could also do the same progression with a little different voice leading. Maybe you do something like this. G major, flat 9, and then right to C major, and then I'm going to D major here, and then E minor, A7, so I'm using a few suspensions and a few dissonances, inner line movement there to make it more interesting, but still the same diatonic common tone modulation. Okay, number 2, chromatic pivot chord modulation. Let's say we're going to modulate from the key of C to the key of E minor. A chromatic pivot chord is a pivot chord that's not contained within the first key. So this might be a common progression. I'll do a really simple one. C, and then let's say we move up to a B diminished over D. So this is a first diminished, that's a 7-6 chord, okay? Because the 7 chord in the key of C is B diminished, but it's in first inversion. So you got 1, and then 7-6, and then we're going to go to our chromatic pivot chord here, D sharp diminished 7. It's up a half step. It's built on the what would be the 7th scale degree of the new key. Okay, so this is E minor here. So this is a 7 diminished 7 of E minor, which is the 1 chord here. Okay, this is actually your pivot chord here. This is the pivot chord because it's not connected to the key of C. The D sharp is not in the key of C at all. Okay, so it's a really, you'd say abrupt modulation, although when I play it for you now, you're not going to think of it as an abrupt modulation, but this is a very common use here, where you're using a chord right here, D sharp, because the note D sharp is not contained in the key of C. Okay, so this chord is this B diminished. This is really done by voice leading as well, but you'll see this is just if you're thinking of E harmonic minor, this would be the 7th chord in it, okay? Just to refresh, E harmonic minor, E, F sharp, G, A, B flat, C sharp, I'm sorry. Just to refresh, E harmonic minor, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D sharp. If you look at D sharp, F sharp, A, C. Okay? D sharp, F sharp, A, C is a D sharp diminished 7th chord. Okay, this is a 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. Okay, so let's check out how it sounds. Okay, so here's what it would sound like in the key of C. This is the same progression. So I get C major, then I'm going to go to first inversion diminished 7th chord. So here, and then this is a B diminished. Okay, so let me show you this example. We got C major, sure. Then I'm going to go to first inversion B diminished chord, so B diminished over D, and then here's the pivot chord. D sharp diminished 7 to E minor. Play it again. 1, first inversion diminished 7, pivot chord, chromatic, pivot chord to the new key of E minor. Okay, so that chord, this D sharp diminished 7, is from this key. So this D sharp diminished 7th chord is from this key, E harmonic minor. E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D sharp. Listen to the chord. So that's your chromatic pivot chord. Okay, the enharmonic dominant modulation requires you to know what an augmented 6th chord, like a German augmented 6th. Because what we're doing essentially is respelling the augmented 6th chord as a dominant 7th chord and using that as a 5 chord to cadence to a 1 chord. So let's say you're in the key of C minor. Your augmented 6th chord would be built off A flat, so it'd be the notes A flat, C, E flat, F sharp. Okay, this is your augmented 6th interval there. This would be a German 6th chord. Now, if we respell this chord, see it's built on the flat 6, and one of the reasons that the typical voice leading of an augmented 6th chord is that the flat 6 moves down to the 5th of the dominant chord, and the F sharp moves up to the 5th. Okay, number 3, the enharmonic dominant modulation. This requires you to know what an augmented 6th chord is, especially a German augmented 6th. Let's say that we're in the key of C minor, okay? C minor, so there's your 1 minor chord. The augmented 6th, the German augmented 6th chord in this key would be built off A flat. Have the notes A flat, C, E flat, F sharp. These outer voices would have that augmented 6th interval. Now typically augmented 6th chords will resolve to 1-6-4 chords, okay? And the reason being is in order to avoid parallel fifths, the A flat in this case is going to resolve to the 5th, or the G is the 5th of the C minor chord, and the F sharp is going to resolve up to the G. C would stay as a common tone, E flat would stay as a common tone. Okay, this is a second inversion, so this is a 1-6-4. Okay, it's a C minor chord with a G in the bass. Now, here's the difference. If you take the same chord that's built off A flat, this German 6, German augmented 6th, and you look at it, and you respell this F sharp enharmonically and make it a G flat, you have a simple A flat 7, right? A flat C, E flat, G flat. And that's going to be a 5 chord. This is your modulation chord to go to D flat major, let's say. So this is an enharmonic dominant modulation. So you're modulating to the key a half step away using an augmented 6th chord respelled enharmonically. I'm going to show you right now. And let's say you're coming from a 4-6-4 chord. So a 4-6-4 chord would be F minor in this case. And then I go to my German 6, which is A flat, C, E flat, F sharp, which is really F sharp. It's really an A flat dominant chord, but that typically will resolve to a 1-6-4, so that's a C minor over G, and then to G major, and then to C minor. So listen to the sound. 4-6-4 to the, there's your German 6 chord, to your 1-6-4, to your 5, to your 1 chord. Now, in this case, when you do an enharmonic dominant modulation, that German 6 chord built on A flat, which would be A flat, C, E flat, F sharp, becomes A flat, C, E flat, G flat. It's the same chord, but you're going to modulate to D flat major. That's going to become the 5 chord. So you can go from F minor, first inversion, go to your augmented 6 chord, which becomes an A flat 7 to a D flat major chord. Then it's simply a 5-1 cadence. Okay, so that is using enharmonic spelling to create a difference. You're modulating actually from C minor ultimately to D flat major. So it's a half step modulation. Okay, number 4, deceptive cadence. Deceptive cadence is simply when the dominant chord in a major key, for example, goes to the 6th chord. So let's say you're in the key of C. You get C major, 1 chord, F major is 4, G major is 5, and then A minor is a 6th chord. Well, it's not really a deceptive cadence unless it actually goes into that key. Okay, so this has to be the transition chord. So if I go, let's say I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I got B minor 7 flat 5 to E7 flat 9 to A minor. That would be a definite modulation right here. This is a modulation to A minor. So it occupies the 6th chord in this key, but it actually becomes the 1 chord there, because this is the 2 minor 7 flat 5 to the 5 7 flat 9 in this key. This is a very simple, very common cadence, the deceptive cadence, deceptive modulation. So this chord actually has 2 functions at once, but it's typically when your 5 chord doesn't go back to the tonic, it goes to the 6th chord, to the submediant. Okay, deceptive cadence. 1, 4, 5, 6, there's your deceptive cadence. But really, it needs to go from your 6th chord, right? So to your 2, 5, back to your 1. Then you know that it's a deceptive cadence because it's actually modulated to A minor. So once again, 1, C major, F major is 4, G major is 5, A minor is 6. Then I'm going to go to the minor 2 chord. Then I'm going to go to the 5 chord in A minor, and then resolve back to the 1 chord in A minor. So that's clearly has been a modulation. Okay, modulation number 5 is the enharmonic diminished 7th. Very simply, this is a diminished 7th chord that is respelled enharmonically to create a modulation. Okay, so I have a progression here starting in C major. I have the 1 chord C major, the 5 chord G7, the 7 chord B diminished 7th, then I'm back to the 1 chord. Then I have a G sharp diminished 7 over B resolving to A minor. So that's a modulation right here to A minor, okay? Now, this chord, if we spelled this chord, I spelled a B diminished 7th chord here. B diminished 7th is B, D, F, A flat. A G sharp diminished 7th chord is G sharp, B, D, F. Well, what do you notice? You notice they're the same notes. So G sharp diminished 7th chord equals B diminished 7th. They're all the same notes. But we have this enharmonic here. The G sharp, the A flat becomes G sharp. All the rest of the notes are spelled the same, B, D, F. That's why I put G sharp diminished 7 over B, because it's a first inversion diminished 7th chord resolving to A. But to the ear, it sounds the same as this chord. Check it out. You have your 1 chord to your 5-7. Then you're going to go to your B diminished to C major. Then B diminished, G sharp diminished over to A minor. So same chord. This is B diminished 7. If I go like this, and this is G sharp diminished 7. Same notes, except it's enharmonically spelled. The A flat here becomes a G sharp down here, and if I put it in first inversion, it's the same chord. That's your enharmonic diminished 7th modulation. That's all for now. I'm going to be doing part 2 tomorrow, where I'll be covering diminished 7th to dominant 7th modulations, chromatic mediant modulations, common tone or pivot note modulations, direct or linear modulations, chain modulations, and parallel modulations. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel, and if you're interested in the Beato book, you can write me at rickbeato1@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.